You're listening to the Unlocking Africa podcast.
One of my final assignments before leaving to start Revna Bio, we were working on a study requiring 300 patients. We couldn't find sites on the continent for the study for so many reasons. When we said we're setting up a precision medicine company in Sub-Saharan Africa, everyone was like, why would you start from there? And we said, well, context matters. This is what it means to us. That for me is what drives me, knowing that these challenges and the totality of who I am as a person has to be more than my personal comfort or interest. It has to be more than that.
Stay tuned as we bring you inspiring people who are unlocking Africa's economic potential. You're listening to the Unlocking Africa podcast with your host, Tessa Adamu.
Welcome to another episode of the Unlocking Africa podcast, where we explore the ideas, innovations, and strategies that are unlocking Africa's economic potential. Today's guest is Derrick Akpalu, co-founder and CEO of Revna Biosciences, an impact-oriented biomedical company building world-class diagnostic and research capabilities right in the heart of Africa. Derrick, welcome to the Unlocking Africa podcast. How are you?
Thank you very much. I am very well. Thank you.
As we spoke earlier, you've mentioned that you're in Pennsylvania and it's 6 a.m, so I appreciate you taking the time to join us today.
Hey, thank you. And this actually is my usual schedule when I'm outside of Ghana, where we have a morning huddle at 8 a.m. GMT. So usually, irrespective of where I am, I have to be up out of bed 8 a.m. GMT just to touch bases with the team. So this is just part of my normal working day, Tessa.
Fantastic. As always, I like to start with the person before the company. Every founder has a moment where the problem becomes personal. So was it a personal or professional experience that led you to found Revna Biosciences?
Yes, good question. I think for me, it was a combination of the two. See, I am a scientist. I started off and have always been in clinical research, drug development. So clinical research, clinical pharmacology, been the things that I've worked on. And one of my final assignments in Johnson & Johnson before leaving to start Revna Bio was in the lung cancer space, where we were working on a study requiring 300 patients in particular. And we couldn't find sites on the continent for the study for so many reasons, not because we didn't want to or anything, but because we didn't have the capabilities and the infrastructure to identify and run these studies in a regulatorily compliant way because of, one, the requirements of the study and then the infrastructure, as I mentioned, but particularly also because if you look at where drug development is going, everything is getting targeted. So targeted therapy, meaning that you need some insights about biomarkers of your population and then some capabilities. And these were absent. And that was the moment for me where I asked myself, after about 15 years in drug development across the spectrum, do I know enough or a little bit to then go back to the continent and say, if we had, say, a Revna Bio there right now, how would that then make things easier for the current, scientists and clinical development people to say, let's include this population because we have all the necessary capabilities to include that population. And that was it for me, personal, professional.
Thank you for sharing that. So what was it from that professional and personal experience that made you realize that precision medicine could be used as some kind of lever to transform healthcare on the continent?
Okay, so the very basic day-to-day personal part of it was, listen, I'm Ghanaian as it can be genetically and all. And the question of, hey, what if you become a patient for this sort of a therapy? What happens? But then the other part of it about precision medicine specifically for that region for which we thought this was a good place to even, set up shop is basically looking at the genomic richness of the continent where, there's so much diversity on the continent that we felt that from a qualitative perspective, bringing insights from this region would accelerate precision medicine for all. Because from a very simplistic format, think of it this way. You're trying to build a globally representative data set. Yet you have this continent that is super saturated with insights, but then you've only gotten a sliver of insights from there. Imagine what could happen if you expand the insights that you get from there and include that in your global data set. That is the common sense thing that we're trying to address here by saying there's so much insight here that we could leverage for all of us. Let's do this. And that's what Revna Bio is trying to do.
You touched on the genomic diversity or the richness of the genomic diversity or makeup in Africa. Does that present any challenges to the work that you're doing?
It does, and a very good one, because, so I'll give you an example. Most of these therapies, as I mentioned, are getting targeted. And then if you look on the labels, a lot of them are biomarker driven. So you have to have some insights. You have to be able to identify and characterize patients for them to become eligible to these things. Now, you have a situation where one, infrastructure hasn't been around, and then also you have a population that hasn't previously been studied in some instances or exposed to some of these interventions. So your rollout of these tests, even when it comes to diagnostics and all, becomes a bit challenging, because you have to first go through a process of verification and validation that this actually may even work here. What that means is that while the rest of the world is consuming or benefiting from these new treatments, you are now in the process of essentially doing your trial to validate that this works. So you're already late. And this is what we're trying to bridge now and avoid in the future by what Revna Bio seeks to do and the path we're on.
From what you mentioned, it sounds like you're not just practicing medicine, but architecting it in a sense and creating an ecosystem within the continent. But I was wondering, what does that mean in practical terms for how you're building the company in this ecosystem?
Great question, Tessa. So it is exactly what we're trying to do here. We're building, we're not just, providing a service. It's an ecosystem where we say it's a synergized ecosystem that we're building. Because when we said we're setting up a precision medicine company in Sub-Saharan Africa, everyone was like, well, what is that? And why would you start from there and all of that? And we said, well, context matters. This is what it means to us to start a precision medicine company in an area where, yes, it may look like in some instances, if you're looking at the products available, that we're retrofitting. But the situation on the ground is actually one where, because you don't have a lot of infrastructure, you're not constrained to modify certain things or tools, right? You almost have like a canvas to build stuff from scratch without those structural constraints of the existing. So what I mean by that is, in precision medicine for us on the continent, we started off by saying, how do we bridge this infrastructural challenge for drug development? That was the original goal. So we're going to be like your CRO, set up with a central lab to do all these things. But then we quickly realized, guess what? Well, what about the baseline? How do you even find these patients, characterize these patients, characterize the disease, and then funnel them into the trial? So then we started doing what we call the advanced molecular diagnostics. And let me just share something here, Tessa. So what a lot of people don't realize is that in Sub-Saharan Africa, as we're speaking right now, every single day, thousands and thousands of samples are being shipped from that region to other parts of the world, Asia, Europe, and all, for tests that frankly shouldn't leave the shores of any country in this day and age. What that does is that, one, it robs the area of key baseline insights. So how do we solve that? So we decided to start addressing those tests that would normally not be done in the region. NGS-based tests, even some as basic as some serological assessments and all. And the process of it was we would do diagnostics, but as we're doing diagnostics, we're scientists. So we're paying attention to data. We're scouring through the data to draw insights that inform the sort of research questions that we ask. We also have a biobank that allows us to bank these samples for research today, but then to also support clinical decision-making or retesting, but then also positions us to be able to tap into those insights in the future as well.
You mentioned that context matters, but let us look at why precision medicine matters for Africa. Why do you believe Africa actually needs it even more urgently than other regions or continents?
Perfect. So I think in the tragedy is the urgency of what we need. What I mean by that is in Ghana and most of these African countries, most patients present very late. Let's stick with the oncology space, for instance. So you have patients who would come in stage 3B and the like. These are not patients who have time to do first line, second line experimentation, if you want to call it that. Their time is short. They're already late. You're seeing diseases progress to stages where you wouldn't see elsewhere. So if you ask me, if there is any population that needs it, even just from a clinical and purely clinical point of view, from a triaging perspective, then this population needs it the most. But then layer that on with the fact that this is a population that, one, hasn't been well studied because of the challenges or the things that Revna is solving for from a capabilities perspective. But then you also have the genetic complexity that comes with this population as well in terms of the diversity, where we don't have those baselines and all. So it becomes imperative that, yes, precision medicine, which is personalized, tailored, and a bit more specific to the individual, be rolled out here. And in that process of addressing the needs of this urgently sick population today in the region, while doing that, you also gain insights that benefit all of us globally and also ensure that this situation doesn't carry on for additional generations beyond now.
So if we look close in terms of the genetic diversity and complexity, how does that change the way diseases should be diagnosed and treated compared to Western populations?
I think it is exactly where it's going for everyone. So it's not going to be or shouldn't have to be so different. I think what it is all of us are beginning to realize that irrespective of your ethnicity or race, we're all different. Just like you and I could pass as brothers, maybe, we all, and all, but genetically we might be very, very different. Right. And therefore, with all the tools we have right now, we need to be a bit smarter. We need to be a bit more individualistic when it comes to these things to say, this is what this person's genetic makeup looks like. This is what their environment, lifestyle, and all, add on to that. And therefore, this is the right way to treat them. And I think that is the approach that needs to be encouraged more and more on the continent, just as it is happening elsewhere as well.
As you mentioned or touched on, we are going in the right direction, but obviously to get there, we need the infrastructure on the ground, which is something that you're hopefully contributing to building. So why is building local molecular diagnostic capacity such a critical piece of healthcare in Africa?
I think it is the only way to establish your standard of care and make sure that your standard of care is evolving. What is that standard of care? If I go to, let's say, a specialist in a certain part of the world, their standard of care might be, you need to do this confirmatory test and do this. A lot of these standards of care are based on heuristic and years of evidence generation and synthesis, right? Now, if we're in the continent and we're not building the capacity to generate these data and then scour them analyze them the way I was saying we're doing or trying to do in the Revna side, then we fall behind because you're not paying attention to the population that you're dealing with and trying to understand what is unique about them, and therefore how do we ensure that treatment is effective based on their set of data, not borrowed data from elsewhere.
I guess because of that lack of infrastructure and capacity, many countries still send samples overseas. What would you say are the economic or even clinical costs of that model?
Yeah. So from an economic perspective, think of the patient. This is a service that you're deprived of because of capacity issues or infrastructure issues. So what that means is that the service has to be exported. The service is exported, the country loses on that revenue to start off with because that money is being paid elsewhere. If you're in Africa, this is not just a small issue because a lot of the African currencies there are subject to foreign currency pressures beyond. And these things contribute even at that level. But for the patient, out-of-pocket cost increase because someone has to pay for that sample being shipped. You also have to cover the cost of potentially the service being more expensive elsewhere because we know that cost of living and cost of labor is actually cheaper on the continent versus elsewhere. So that's the direct cost to the patient. How else does it impact the patient? You're losing a lot of time. You're also losing potentially sample integrity issues. We saw this cold chain issue during the COVID situation. Now we have samples that are being transported cross-continent. And oftentimes, chain of custody isn't something that is fully tracked. Cold chain maintenance is a challenge. So those samples go there, results come back. What's your recourse if you need a reassessment? Those are some of the costs to the patient. Clinically as well, what does it mean? Delayed treatment or initiation of interventions, even in a population that's already presenting very late to the hospital. So it impacts your outcomes as a population. But overall, even from a public health perspective, as these samples are being exported, as these tests are being exported, those are baseline data that are being generated outside of the region that are not, in a lot of instances, even being shared back with originating countries to say, hey, these are the trends, because realistically speaking, in whose interest is it? And why would they do that? Because they're not even built out to solve that problem in any way. So those are some of the challenges here where by outsourcing these tests, you're basically exporting your baseline insights and depriving yourself of the opportunity to dynamically advance your standard of care.
Thank you for sharing that. I guess without giving away too much, what would you say would be the cost for building an efficient and effective ecosystem that can achieve the type of work or outcomes you believe are needed?
So we're talking that's in dollar amount?
Yep.
That's difficult to estimate. I mean, if I were to use a West African context, because that's what I'm most familiar with, to establish something like this, you're definitely in the 8-digit range if you really want to do this to that global standard where you have a very integrated ecosystem that is comparable to all, and then also to the standards, the ISO standards that the rest of the world plays to. You'll definitely need to be in the 8-digit range for you to meaningfully begin impacting or addressing the issue.
Yeah, and I assume that 8-digit range is because you're building a fully integrated, almost ecosystem that works across many areas, such as yourself. You're operating across diagnostic, clinical research, drug access, biobanking, and treatment. So was there a reason why you decided to have a fully integrated model rather than just one service?
Yes, I think it was because the problem we're trying to solve hasn't been attempted. And looking at where we were and the pace at which everything else is going, our minimum, and let me borrow this expression, our minimum viable product had to be more than just focused on one thing, because the problems we're trying to solve were threefold but very interlinked. So we're looking at treatment failure, we're looking at diagnostic lack of penetration, and then the genomic lack of genomic insights from the region. Now, because of that, we couldn't operate a traditional model of let's just focus on the one and then leave the other. We wanted to address all of these in a very streamlined way. And therefore, we had to establish a facility that has, all these multidisciplinary lab capabilities, couple that with a biobank, make sure that we had a digital solutions backbone to help us do that. And in fact, we do have as many data scientists and software developers as we do clinical operations scientists in Revna because of that. So if you look at it, it was because we looked at the problem and felt that this was a problem that needed an ecosystem-like approach to it, as opposed to a singular product or service offering approach.
As you just mentioned, it requires like an ecosystem or partnership approach. So can you walk us through how a hospital or pharma partner would work with Revna from patient identification through to, say, treatment selection?
Sure. So let's start with the more front-facing one. So let's use a hospital setting, for instance. So most of our hospitals in the country offer some level of a routine to basic testing. And then when it gets a bit more complicated and all, just from the economics of it, it's easier to send those to a more specialized lab or referral lab, which is what the Revna facility has become. Mind you, the sort of tests we're doing are those tests that hitherto would have been shipped out of the region. So it just naturally dovetails into the operations of a lot of these healthcare facilities and hospitals. So at that point, they'll send these tests to us. We would run these tests. A lot of these may be biomarker-driven kind of tests, and then provide the insights to them. And usually, as we're doing this using digital solutions, we interact virtually. So not a lot of paperwork. It's all electronic. We have an external portal that most of these facilities would normally interact with us, from requesting the test to tracking the test progress to just getting the reports that are when they are available. And as you do that, for each of the facilities, you then begin to build a data set for them specifically. And they will then be able to, with our help, characterize these patients, stratify these patients, and then track how they're doing in terms of treatment and whatever interventions that one would require. And this way, one, we're providing the diagnostics insight. Two, we're also able to provide public health insights or just aggregate level insights for them, something that most of the existing diagnostic companies wouldn't be interested in because they're not research oriented, they're not clinical development oriented in that way. So that capability isn't really essential to their business model. But for us, it is, because while we're doing that, remember, we're also banking samples for the patients to say, if you need to do some reruns, we have these samples and we can do those reruns for you at your baseline. And then if we need clinical studies with those facilities as well, we have a population that both of us, as in Revna and you, have been able to take care of. We have clinical data to support that based on the treatment that you put the patient on. And therefore, as these studies come, we can say, hey, going through this small database we have, these are the patients most likely to be eligible for this study. Let's look at that. So you build that continuum of patient today, treated, outcome, real-world insight, future study, maybe patients is eligible, they participate in the study, and then those insights become relevant to these same patients or other populations.
With regards to banking patient samples, how important is a long-term sample storage and data ownership for Africa's research future?
I think it's a global thing. It's a global imperative. It's not just an Africa thing. It's for everyone, all of us. But again, on the continent, the agency is a bit more because we're currently a bit behind. the region is a bit behind in terms of some of these insights and all. And therefore, it's very topical right now. It's very urgent that these insights are accrued. So banking samples for research today and then subsequently, very, very critical. And that's why for us, we're actively banking in an ISO-accredited setting, because it is important that we bank to global standards and not just bank for banking's sake. And then also data security, as I mentioned, we need to know what our baselines are. We need to be able to know how things are evolving, so trend analysis and all, and use that to update our standards of care as those data mature and our insights evolve.
I guess this all feeds into that integrated approach that we've talked about continuously during this conversation. And it's definitely needed on the continent, but it sounds like it can be, or it is, capital intensive. So how do you balance the cutting edge science approach that you have with also the needs of affordability for African patients and payers?
Yeah, it's something we grapple with every day. It's Thursday or so, I believe, already. And I can tell you I've had about five or six conversations this week. And all of it has been about pricing model and all. So let me show you some of the practical ways we're doing this. The easiest for us is just pricing transparency. So we deal with the likes of QIAGEN, Diatech. These are life sciences and diagnostic giants in Europe. QIAGEN, for instance, has been with us, a big supporter from day one. The relationship we've been fortunate to have with manufacturers like this who believe in what we're doing and actively support us is that we cut out the middle person. So there's no middleman. We source directly from QIAGEN. We source directly from Diatech. And what we do in those instances is we go back and say, look, this is the price point that we think the patient can afford based on the prevailing conditions. How do we work our way backwards? So, add all our cost points, including import taxes and all of those, and then ask and then come back to what a good starting cost would be for us, or cost of goods would be for us. That's one of the ways that we're trying to solve this, where we take out the middle person, but also are very transparent and are closely having these conversations with our manufacturing partners to say, these are the rates that would make sense in this region, work with us. So that's the first part. The other part of it as well is to try to do things in a bit more of a common sense approach. So typically in a lot of clinical settings, especially in the region, when patients go in for certain conditions, they would focus on specific tests. Let's use an example here. Let's say infectious disease, STI, sexually transmitted infections. Usually when someone has an STI, oftentimes they have more than one infection. A lot of sexually transmitted infections may also be quite asymptomatic. In instances where a patient goes, for instance, in Ghana and is requested or is asked to go do a CT, an NG, this chlamydia and gonorrhea kind of a test, the cost for that test hovers around, let's say, about $100 plus, between $100 and $150 for that test out of pocket. So we looked at it and said, as research-oriented entities, playing in the diagnostic space as one of the offerings we have, what can we do here? So we found a partner, Diatech from Turkey, that had this panel for STI, where we could basically, for the cost of the CT-NG, run a test for a patient that looks at up to 18 different pathogens for less than that cost. Now, what are we doing in that instance? We're doing two things. We're offering the patient a comprehensive view of their reproductive health space, but then also using that to then generate baseline data for all of us. Because the more of those full panel approach that we roll out, the quicker and the richer our insight generation is. So we use these two approaches where we do combo testing or panel testing and make sure that those panel testing are priced more competitively than if you're done the a la carte kind of approach and then add on, and next thing you know, by the time you're 2 or 3 tests, you're better off doing the panel kind of a test. It helps the patient, the cost is cheaper, but then from a clinical perspective, it offers more utility and insight and better outcomes. But then what it also does in that process is enriching our research question and trend work as well.
As we've identified, cost is a significant factor, but we also know that healthcare is a trust business. If people don't trust your standards, nothing else matters. So you hold multiple international accreditations and quality standards. So how important is that credibility when working with governments and global partners?
It is the starting point. And, looking back at when I was on the other side, as in the industry, as a scientist, looking or interacting with facilities and all of those things, those were the things that you sort of use to determine parity. Okay, what is the equivalent of this, say, in Ghana to somebody who is in, say, Canada, for instance? How do you compare the quality? It's using these international accreditations and all. And we invest heavily in that. And we knew that out of the gate because it is how most of these global entities assess capability, because it standardizes the approach and gives that level of comfort to say that once you have your processes, because what it does is it gives you processes, you have your SOPs, you have your workflows that are standardized and can give you that level of reliability in terms of quality of data and then consistency as well. So we take that very seriously, as you can see, and out of the gate we noticed that was it. So when we go to speak with life sciences entities that are very focused on clinical development, it is one of those entry points. Oh, you have your ISO accreditations. Which EQA programs are you involved in, and are you current with those? And by the way, EQAs are external quality assurance schemes. These are schemes where on a regular basis, usually quarterly, we will subscribe, and these are paid services where samples are sent to us, blinded, and you basically run them in your facility and report the results. And the results have to be within a certain range of the original to demonstrate that you are running these things the way they should be run.
These international standards are definitely a way to remove challenges and also to enable you to do your work. So if we look at enabling you to do your work, what advice would you give to, say, policymakers who want to create an enabling environment for biotech, bioscience companies such as yours to thrive locally?
Locally, key. So I think for us, at least based on the experiences that we have, one, I think the first part of it is we need to pay attention to the indirect costs, to some extent even the direct cost, because running Revna in Ghana is very expensive because of the import tax and also because of just the nature of our consumables and goods. We practically have to import everything from reagents to equipment to a lot of the consumables. And all of these attract quite significant import taxes as well. If we could have situations where those kinds of taxes could be addressed, then it helps the patient as well, because to be a sustaining business, you have to cover those costs and then some, right? And unfortunately, that means transferring some of these to patients. So if some of those costs could be minimized or even eliminated in some instances, then we tend to serve more patients. More patients are healthier and can contribute more meaningfully economically as well to the economic growth of these local markets. Secondly, we also need a bit of update when it comes to the ethics and the regulatory monitoring of these things, because we're in a situation where things are constantly evolving. What made sense previously doesn't make sense now, and we will need our regulatory bodies to be in step with some of these updates in terms of, even data storage, data security. All of these things are changing. How are we doing in terms of our regulatory updates? Are we keeping up and those kinds of things? Then we're also looking at just basic biosafety, biosecurity, and all. As all of these samples are being shipped out, who's paying attention? Why are these samples going? Why can't they be done locally? Keep those insights local so that we all contribute meaningfully to the global data sets as well. These are some of the things that policy needs to look at. Ethics of what we're doing, the economics of it, and also promotion of some of these activities where you're giving some waivers in terms of tax incentives and those kinds of things, I think would help. But then also, even from a structured capacity building perspective, can we establish avenues where the next generation of scientists and clinicians can also come in to a Revna facility, for instance, and have rotations done as part of their curriculum, so that some of those things that they may be reading about or even seeing on YouTube or other platforms, they can actually have hands-on experience of them and understand their use cases, so that when they go back to their clinics or the clinical setting, they know that these tools are available. They know when to use these tools for which of their patients and to use them for as well.
You highlighted the indirect cost, which can impact growth. So looking at your growth in terms of partnerships, what kind of partnerships do you believe have been most impactful in accelerating Revna's growth?
I think it's difficult to choose. Unfortunately, I think, so if I look at what the likes of the Kaigens, the Diatex, and IDOs have done for us, ensuring that we've had these technologies up front in the region as quickly as possible, they've played a role because, yes, we needed those platforms. But then we also have the partnerships with the institutions, with the likes of AstraZeneca or the industry partners, who then have, leveraged the availability of these. Because, again, remember, a lot of these therapies are targeted. So if we didn't have the technology, the therapies wouldn't be able to get to the region. That's the access to medicine. But then it being available enables the likes of AstraZeneca and co. to bring third generation TKIs, for instance, to the region, because guess what? The biomarker testing part of it has been solved because of this collaboration. But then for the patient, all of them matter because the technology part from the manufacturers helped, but then the part of the life sciences or drug manufacturer who comes in and leverages the existence of biomarker testing to address access to medicine then leads to that impact. So it's a reason why the synergized ecosystem and the approach we have helps, because then you're not just solving one problem and leaving the other part for somebody else to pick and run with, but you're enabling the whole outcome, because you're starting from diagnostics, going all the way to treatment, and then still doing real life insights to inform the next generation of treatments and diagnostics. So I think it all matters. It's a long response to your short question.
No. Great response. You touched on your partnerships or the work that you've done with the likes of AstraZeneca. So how do you believe global pharma or biotech companies should engage Africa, not just as a market, but almost as co-creators of science and this level of discovery that we are engaging in?
I think, yes, we need to look at things very differently, and the ones who are even open-minded to doing that are going to get a lot more benefit and a lot more advancement very quickly, because in trying to understand the space, in trying to be part of the solution for today's patients in that region, what you're actually doing in that instance is taking advantage of a situation that ensures that the next generation of African patients are better placed, but it then translates beyond the African continent to global. Because guess what? Your product label expands because you've just increased your addressable market just because you've tried to solve a problem on the continent right now. You've opened up markets for yourself. You've opened up strategic advantages because you've been able to figure something out, or you're doing something that the others aren't doing. These are the fine margins that will lead to that next wave of what's it called, dominance or impact for these life sciences partners. We just have to find creative ways, and hopefully there'll be more Revnas or different versions of Revnas to facilitate these. But that is the approach. That is what we're talking to some of these life sciences people to say, let's look at things differently. There isn't an entity on the continent exactly like Revna, and for good measure. We're solving problems and looking at it from a different way. We can't always and shouldn't always do things the old way or the way they've always been. There's always another way of solving things that may have other advantages and lead us to better outcomes as well.
Thank you for that. As you know, on Unlocking Africa podcast, we always like to connect innovation back to economic opportunity and jobs. You know, we often talk about payments, logistics, and energy as economic infrastructure. But in the next 5 to 10 years, do you see diagnostics or genomics being core healthcare infrastructure in Africa's growth story?
Oh, yes, definitely. I mean, the amount of requests that we get about genomic testing, DNA testing for all sorts of things, and people going even beyond its use in your classical clinical settings, where they're asking questions about, okay, how can I use this to inform how I eat? How do I use this to inform how I work out? How do I use this to inform which sorts of medications to consume and all of those, or even to some extent what nutrients and stuff to pay attention to based on my, how my body is interacting with all of these things. And the interest even from ordinary people to want to understand and personalize their whole approach in terms of consumption, how how they're living as people is exciting. I think it opens opportunities on a global scale, but in particular in the region as well, because one of the insights or things that we're beginning to pick up is this need. And I think it's just a cultural thing maybe in the region where people prefer the preventative to the curative or the reactive. Which was one of those surprising things for me, to learn recently, because we've always thought of the fact that, and this is a sort of a running joke in Ghana sometimes, where one of the questions I asked a friend whilst having a conversation about just the culture in Ghana when it comes to maintenance was the question I posed. I said, listen, I speak about 3-4 Ghanaian local languages. What is the local word for maintenance in any of these languages? And we couldn't. We didn't know it.
Oh, wow.
And to come back now into a setting where, from a lifestyle perspective, people are actually addressing things related to maintenance or prevention when it comes to health in various ways, and now beginning to ask how can AI, how can genomics help us in this space, was actually refreshing to know, and something that is actually impacting how we're evolving as a company. But I think eventually, yes, the opportunities abound in this genomic space, because that's where everything is going. We're all very different because genetically we're different from lifestyle and all of those as well. We do things differently, and all of those things have to be taken into consideration if we are to maximize our well-being.
Fantastic. So with that in mind and that said, how is Revna intentionally positioning itself so that it becomes fundamental infrastructure within that growth story?
Great. We started off by addressing the very obvious, which is these diagnostic tests that are being shipped and the long wait times associated with them and all. How do we address those? So we started addressing those quickest turnaround time for every single test that we have pretty much on our list right now. And we have close to 300 of them, or if not more, as we count. We're addressing that unmet need. We're also looking at building capacity. So in Revna right now, our scientists get the opportunity to go outside of the region, Europe and other parts, to be trained on some of these new technology that we're bringing in. For instance, next week, we're having scientists from Europe actually come to the Revna facility to train some of our staff on tools such as digital PCR that we're rolling out to serve certain subpopulations in the market. So through this, we're building capacity. We're localizing these advancements. We also have biomedical engineers who we send out to be trained by these manufacturers so that, one, we minimize our downtime, but two, have the expertise in-house round the clock to ensure that operationally we're up and running all the time. We also then place our facility and make it available for academic institutions to have students either run their dissertation work, those that need bench work. In our labs, we try to make that work with our schedule to help these students, one, have hands-on training or experience doing some of these things here. And then from a research perspective, we collaborate very closely with our clinical partners. So some of the facilities we work with are research oriented. Some of the investigators are also very interested in research, and we support a lot of these investigator-initiated studies. We also support industry-based studies, and also trying really hard to ensure that this platform serves cross borders as well, and not just the Ghana population. These are some of the ways that we're trying to make sure that Revna supports these things, supports patients today, but making sure that tomorrow's patients have better fighting chance. We're working closely with our manufacturing partners to ensure that technologically we're not behind. So whether it's NGS, whether it's digital PCR or any of the latest tools out there, we have them locally as a result of these strong relationships. And we don't just have them as things or tools that we use in the clinical setting, but we actually also use creative ways to embed these in scientific and medical training programs in the region as well.
Fantastic. Thank you for that. Last question.
Quote of the week.
As people, we often have quotes, mantras, African proverbs, or affirmations that keep us going when times are challenging or when times are good. Do you have one that you can share with us today?
So the one thing that I always challenge the Revna team with, which is what I always use to sort of drive myself when we sort of hit the wall, get to that point where I ask myself, what made me even decide to leave, J&J to come and do something as difficult and challenging as this, is to just ask myself, what is the worth or what's the value of the totality of your life experiences? Was it just for you to live a comfortable life, or was it something that was beyond self? And that for me is what drives me, knowing that these challenges, these experiences, and the totality of who I am as a person has to be more than my personal comfort or interest. It has to be more than that.
Derrick, that has been such an insightful conversation. I think for me, what really stands out is that you're not just building a company, you're building an ecosystem. And that is exactly how sustainable systems are created, because I believe when we own the science, we also own the solution. So well done, and looking forward to seeing how things develop in the future.
Hey, Tessa, thank you so much for this opportunity. And if you ever happen to be somewhere in the East Coast, let me know, or happen to be somewhere in the West African region, let me know.
Definitely.
It'll be nice to catch up, have tea, coffee, whatever. But thank you so much for this opportunity.
Fantastic. Derrick, absolute pleasure, and I appreciate you waking up so early and also the hiccup that we had. But yeah, no, it was a great conversation. I really enjoyed it.
Same here. Thank you so much.
Thank you to everyone who has listened and stayed tuned to the podcast. If you've enjoyed this episode, please subscribe, share, or tell a friend about it. You can also rate, review us in Apple Podcast or wherever you download your podcast. Thank you and see you next week for the Unlocking Africa podcast.